Spiritual Justice. She's co-author of a book entitled Self and has a new book of her own coming out to be released this year. Maybe it's already released. It's already released. Its title is The Power of Communal Empathy. She is an ordained minister in the Korean Methodist Church. Please help me welcome Professor Sung Yun Lee.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Again, it sounds a lot better when somebody else introduces yourself, right? Yeah, thank you for inviting me here. I am really, really excited to share the empathy-based trauma-informed care in church community. I live here in Mishawaka with my spouse, Ted, who's sitting right there. His role sometimes switches over between my spouse and assistant, especially ever since my injury, even more so. And we have a dog, that's Hound Mix. All right, so let me explain this title a little bit because it's quite a mouthful. It's three-folded, empathy-based, right? So we need to learn about empathy, how empathy works, what is empathy, and what's the drawbacks of empathy. And then trauma-informed care. What is trauma-informed care? Have you ever heard of this term? You have, okay. So probably a few of people, but not many. And then also it involves care in church community. So this lecture will be lengthy and intense, but hopefully it's more practical than intense. So when we are in church community, we deal with all kinds of issues of people's experiences, right? Mental illness, physical illness, loss and grief, marriage issues, and life and death, abuse, emotional turmoils, crisis, suffering, and many more issues. And all these things come together and it may traumatize one person or the whole community. So yes, okay, yeah. Okay, there you go, trauma. So when we provide care, it always involves three dimensions, three different levels. What we are very used to do is individual level, which is micro level, right? Like one-on-one. Oh, this person is going through difficult times. Like I want to make some food and visit the house, and right. So micro level, individual level of care is always easiest and very automatic thing for us. Meso level, which is communal context, like how does our community help and take care of those people who are going through difficult times? And then also macro level, which means we work together to change the society that caused and harmed these people. So keeping this in our mind, what is trauma? Let's turn to trauma. What is trauma? Trauma is, it results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual, and it doesn't really have to be individual, it could be communal trauma, and it could be mass trauma. So the whole society may share the same trauma. So individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individuals, communals, the communities, and also society's functioning and physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So it really, when someone or the community gets traumatized or the group gets traumatized, for example, immigrants with undocumented status, the whole group, the whole family gets traumatized, right? So when they have these traumatic events happen and it traumatizes them, then it impacts them at a very, very multi-dimensional, multifaceted way. That's why trauma is so important to be aware of, for us to be aware of. And when we talk about trauma, there are all kinds of different variation of the types of trauma. For example, it can be categorized by the nature of the traumatic events. Like, is the trauma caused by someone intentionally or without intention? Is trauma caused by natural disaster that you don't have anyone to blame, right? The frequency of duration, the more marginalized the social being is, the person is, the more traumatized and more vulnerable to sustained trauma and repeated trauma. Single trauma, repeated trauma, sustained trauma, meaning sustained trauma means the tension and the difficulties from the traumatic events just is always there, 24 hours in the back of your head. By the dimensions of trauma, it could be physical trauma, psychological trauma, social-cultural trauma, involves subject. Is it individual trauma, group trauma, or community and mass trauma, right? So do we share any trauma in our community? Do we have any particular groups in our community that shares that kind of trauma? So the thing is, as you look through this, it could, at first sight, it could feel like, oh, trauma, okay, one single type each, right? But it doesn't really work that way because traumatic events compound over time in the life course. So for example, let's say Latinx family went through the political terror and then they moved. But then while they were staying there, they were suffering from sustained trauma. And then when they try to seek asylum, and in the process, they get attacked and, like deported by ICE or whatever that happens, right? So then psychological trauma, social cultural trauma, because of my race, because of my citizenship status, all these traumas happen again and again and again at a multifaceted way and levels. Then they suffer from group trauma, which is the whole family as a unit, they struggle with trauma. So in fact, trauma and social justice issues are very intricately intermingled because gender minority, I'll just skip some of this, but LGBTQ, let's say 60%, and then if you see 80% women and 43% men heterosexual, like they go through some type of sexual harassment in their life course, but around 60% LGBTQ population. But the thing is, LGBTQ population's traumatic rate is lower than actual women's trauma. No, that is not true, because when you think about hetero women, it's 53%, it's lower. And the thing is, because there are a lot of LGBTQ population that do not come out because of the stereotypes and the taboos in the society, that those numbers usually of the marginalized groups tend to be lower than actual real life rates. People with lower socioeconomic status, of course, 87%. That's a small sampling, but it means something. Racial minorities, BIPOC, at a much higher risk because of their race, and it's called racial trauma. And also recently in 2007, a scholar created this term, racial trauma or race-based traumatic stress, RBTS, and it's called, and oppression-based traumatic stress, OBTS. So we are psychologists have been studying to see what is the correlation, if there is any, between racial trauma and PTSD. And they're finding more and more about, there are really close, tight relationship between racial traumas and PTSD, which means racially marginalized people can be more vulnerable to PTSD. And even then, think about this. If the LGBTQ population, so let's say one lesbian woman, so biologically woman, right? So she is more vulnerable to trauma as biological woman, and then female, and then she is lesbian. And then she's at a lower socioeconomic status. and then she's racially, let's say, Asian woman, then how would that look, right? It's compounding the rates of the vulnerability to traumatic exposures. So that's really important thing, and more recent research is really more and more show that RBTS, race-based traumatic stress, actually exists. And those people who are racially marginalized people or who are oppression-based traumatized can actually show these symptoms. So they are trying to develop this diagnosis of actually race-based traumatic stress or oppression-based traumatic stress. This is very recent kind of research, and they're still developing this study. But as you can see, it's hypervigilant, intrusive thoughts, low self-worth, and shame, the feeling of shame, feeling of disconnected. They just, at some point, they may just shut down themselves because the outside world does not give you any sense of security. So this is our reality, right? Then what do we do to provide care properly in the church community? That's our next question. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is very reliable for trauma study, informs 4 R's of trauma-informed care approach, which means realize, recognize, respond, resist. What does this mean? And how does it look in our real life? They say when we provide, and we should provide trauma-informed care, when we do that, we need to realize the prevalence, how prevalent the traumas are in our life. Statistically saying, people, around 70% of people in the US have traumas or traumatic events. And I still think that that's lower number compared to the reality, because a lot of people don't really understand what trauma is even. So when they're saying, do you think you're traumatized? A lot of people who do not know what trauma is exactly, no, I'm fine. I'm a normal person, right? And then recognize signs and symptoms of trauma. So what are the signs and symptoms? Knowing the signs and symptoms of the trauma is very helpful as we provide the care. Because if you see anybody who shows there's type of anger, fear, anxiety, flashback, or fatigue, depression, all these things, you may think, is this person possibly traumatized? Then what can I do? In what aspect should I be more careful with this person as I provide care? And then respond. We need to respond by fully integrating all we know and all we learned, which we are doing right now, right? All we learned in the way in which we can draw out changes in policies, procedures, cultures, and every interactions that we encounter with these people. Because look around, this might echo inside of you, for some of you, oh yeah, I'm that way. Or, oh yeah, I think I am also traumatized at some point in my life. Or, oh, I think I am still struggling with my trauma. We don't know, right? Because it's a very sensitive and personal issues that people don't really come out, I'm traumatized, right? So we kind of need to be observant, and also we need to be aware highly of how prevalent the trauma is. And then resist re-traumatization, because unless we don't understand how the trauma works and how people who are traumatized may be needed in care, we unintentionally may re-traumatize those people. So what do I mean by that? Let me go. Yeah. So let's just talk about this first before we move on. So when we see the 4 R's, we again think about micro level care, meso level care, and macro level care. So let's see, realize prevalence of trauma. As an individual, I may study and research and, oh, yes, this is how prevalent the trauma is. I am highly aware. But if my community is not aware as a community, then the community may not be able to provide proper care. Recognize signs and symptoms of trauma. I may individually know about this, but my community may not know. So then what can we do? Right? We can create education programs to train people, to make people be aware, respond by fully integrating knowledge. Individually, it's easier, right? It's more accessible. But as a community, we cannot come into this trauma-informed care approach unless the community and the leadership has this type of mindset, which is based on trauma-informed care. All this coming together in order for us to resist re-traumatization. So then what's the role of empathy here, right? Let's think about it a little bit here. Why empathy? We have so many other emotions. Why particularly empathy? Empathy is known to be the most altruistic affect that is hardwired in your brain in humans to draw out the participation from bystanders, passive bystanders. I have no business with you, but I still care about you because I'm empathic, right? So it can draw out participation from bystanders in empowering the marginalized. So empathy is actually holistic human faculty. It's not just an emotion. It does have emotional aspect, but it does also have cognitive ability, and it also is by nature responsive. What do I mean by that? So for example, this is kind of funny because when you watch a movie, let's say, well, Halloween is coming. Who loves horror movies? Around Halloween? No, not many here. Who loves thrillers? So let's say someone watched a horror movie, very intense, 2 hours. At the end of the movie, how would that person feel? Exhausted, sweaty, like heart racing, and at one point like scream like just like that main character in the movie, right? So that happens because the hardwired nature of empathy, that we are neurologically designed that way in our creation, by God's creation. We're hardwired. We're just designed that way. Unless someone has pathological inability to empathize with others. So that's just nature of human beings and other higher animals, primatology kind of, yeah. So anyways, because of this hardwired, so in-depth and so rudimentary nature of human beings, working through our every interaction, every activity in community, because of that, it's very responsive in nature. For example, you see someone just got hit by a car and it was hit and run. This person is bleeding. This person is screaming, moaning. What your physical reaction would be, right? Pounding race and adrenaline coming up, soaring up, and it's just, you're just in the mode of emergency as if you are the person. And then what do? It just automatically makes you call 911 and come and approach that person and try to stop the bleeding, all those things. So without even thinking cognitively, you react that way. But also it has cognitive aspect, which is also pretty important thing for empathy to be actualized in a moral way, right? If empathy doesn't really have cognitive level, then empathy can actualize in a very, very biased way. What do I mean by that? I'll skip this. This is kind of funny example, but I don't think enough time to. What do I mean by that? Yes, empathy has good sides and bad side in terms of how moral society and community am I making through my empathy. Empathy tends to have this empathic over-arousal, meaning by looking at someone, especially if you're traumatized by previous, some similar experiences, your empathy may be over-aroused. If you're who thinks that I am very empathetic person? Like, is there anybody who feels like I think I am very empathetic? I see some noddings here. So especially when you are very empathetic in your personality, you are more vulnerable to empathic over-arousal. Then what happens? Two scenarios here. Someone can withdraw completely. I can't do this anymore. I'm just shutting it off. And then second, someone who can manage, who I call it mature empathy, who has mature empathic ability, can attenuate the degree of the tension and the empathic distress, and then manage to solve the problem that the other person is going through, because that way your empathic distress will decrease as well. Bias tendency, empathy can be very biased. For example, when you see your family members struggling, and you will probably see the news article stories about like, oh, this person committed a crime and his mom tried to cover it up, right? This between family members, it's much more chance to this person to be empathized with that family member, and then therefore she or he doesn't see the other party's empathic struggles, right? The struggles. So near and dear bias, familiarity bias. I'm not going through this, but for example, like cuteness bias. When human beings see something cute, they have better chance to empathize with that subject. So we have biases in our empathic skills. Empathic inaccuracy, there's no way for us to understand completely what the other person is going through right now, cognitively and emotionally. We just assume, right? So in order to overcome or minimize all these weaknesses of empathy so that we can provide care in a moral way, then we need mature empathy. How do we get mature empathy? It requires training, which church community is a perfect place to provide this kind of training for someone to develop their empathic skills in a more tuned and nuanced way in society. So mature empathy, I defined in my book, is a form of empathy that is morally, psychologically mature state, which can inform and guide us to be socially, communally, morally, spiritually a better person. And what do I mean by a better person? Because my theory is based on developmental psychology. Mature means connotes the normative nuance, because we want to be mature rather than we want to go back to immature state, right? That's just basic, fundamental human tendency to seek to be better. So, yes, that's my book. Just got released a few months ago. And I explained a lot more on this in my book. But here is my practical suggestion for empathy-based traumatic-informed care. Let's go back to these 4 R's first. When we are empathetic with people who are possibly traumatized, or when we act or provide any care, in the back of our head, we think this person might have experienced something that's traumatic. right? So we always keep that in the back of our head, and then because from the realizing prevalence of trauma. And then when we are empathetic, we can more easily recognize those anger, fear, anxiety, and other symptoms as long as we know cognitive intellectually. So intellectual understanding of trauma is the first thing. And then second thing, you combine, integrate those intellectual knowledge and information you have with your empathic skills. So anger, fear, anxiety, flashback. And even if that person does not show any of this because we are meeting in public spaces usually, then you can also assume from what this person has gone through, right? The experience that I know that this person has gone through. You can assume and imagine and simulate what just has happened to this person and how this person would feel like right now. And then from then on, what kind of care can I provide? Can my community provide? And can I do something to change our social systems? When we respond to the person, we also respond with empathy, meaning I'll suggest some a few practical suggestions, but meaning you think through their lenses. And how do we do it? I'll go through that. So one suggestion is you utilizing your emotions, empathy-based emotions. It's called empathic affects. And what it means is that empathy, because it's holistic human faculty, the empathizing process induces those other emotions, which is empathic guilt, empathic anger, empathic disgust, empathic joy, and many more. Any emotions that are caused and induced from your empathizing process, those are the emotions that's called empathic affect. What it does, for example, empathic guilt. When a bystander didn't do anything when something happened to the other person, and then he later on processes and regrets that, oh, I should have done this. I could have done this. I could have done better, right? Then it kind of gives the empathic guilt. But then what does it do? Because of this guilt, next time when the similar things happen, this person is more likely to jump in and gets more motivated because of this empathic guilt that he has been holding inside of him. So this actually motivates people to be more moral and to take more actions for those who are suffering and marginalized. Empathic anger. Anger, really? Right? It has kind of negative connotation. But the thing is, when things happen to people and when traumatic events happen to people, when they see it and they know it's wrong, especially when it's caused by someone else, caused by other human beings intentionally, then they get so angry at that let's say offender for this person who are going through this suffering because of him, right? So that empathic anger actually motivates more people to be more empathetic, and as the result, they have higher chance to take action on, changing that reality for that person. For example, race-based traumatic stress. So as a person of color and as an immigrant from South Korea, I've gone through a lot of racism, right? I've gone through a lot of racial traumas, and it traumatized me. And until I saw the term racial trauma and race-based traumatic stress, I didn't know what was going on inside of me. What is wrong with me, right? For example, in the parking lot, you get attacked just out of blue. Someone who you've never seen before rolls down the window and says, "Go back to your country." Or in the grocery parking lot, they just make sound of monkeys. And like, you don't feel the sense of security when you have that marginality in your social identity. So then you get traumatized. Does it end and it doesn't happen again? No, it happens over and over and over again, right? I mean, these days, look around and the ICE captures, and last night I saw this video that ICE agent was just slammed into the social activist's car and arrested him and put him in the detention center. He's now in hospital. He's a US citizen. So when we see all these things that is not right, then we get angry, we get upset. That is for the other person, not for myself. So that's called empathic anger. Empathic disgust, it's disgusting that human being did to another human being such an action, right? A lot of I'm a dog lover. So let's make an example out of dog. We saw this short video last night that someone abandoned, just left behind this pit bull when they were moving. So this rescuer came and really tried hard to rescue this dog, and eventually he did. When we see that kind of action, it's just beyond our understanding that how come, right? And then some people may feel angry, some people may feel upset, some people may feel disgusted. It's disgusting that someone can do such a thing to another creature. So and empathic joy, which means when you are, so one student, for example, came up to me and said, Professor, I got OPT card. And I know because what OPT card is, meaning he just got the kind of visa thing that he can legally work for 1 year after graduation. He's an international student from Africa. So he's so joyful, and I can be very joyful as much as he is because I know and I have gone through all those experiences, just like him, right? And I know what OPT card is, I know what it implies, I know how much sense of security it will give to him. So because empathy is cognitive understanding and the faculty, we utilize all this information that we have in here to empathize and understand how it feels for the other person. How amazing it is, right? God created us in this way, and for us to live communally, for us to live for each other, for us to live and take care of the creation He created. So when I am very, very joyful for Him, His joy gets maximized, right? And then it can become the source or resource for him to be recovered from his traumatic experiences. Research says that empathic anger actually reduces the person who is struggling, the personal distress of the person who's struggling. So, for example, let's say, yeah. So one student said, "Oh my gosh, I got detained at the airport as I was coming through the airport coming back from Korea, and for no reason, right? And she had to stay in that room. I was was there like twice, I think, and I just had to wait for like 2 hours, 3 hours. Who knows how long it will be, right?" So this Korean woman student who's legally studying in the U.S., she was just going back to school after the vacation, and she was asking questions, completely ignored. Nobody just looked at her, and It's just she had no idea what's going on. Can you imagine that kind of feeling of insecurity? That kind of like, what is going on? I don't know what's gonna happen to me. Am I gonna be sent back to my country? Am I not gonna be able to attend school this semester? Am I gonna have to take leave? What is going on, right? All kinds of thoughts and emotions are stirring up her emotional state, her whole being, right? And God, what's going on? Help me, right? So it also affects one's spiritual well-being as well. When the student talks about this story to me, and I respond by my empathic anger and empathic frustration and say, that is not right. And I affirm her, that is not right. I'm so angry for you. Then the research says and proves that the person who's suffering and struggling, the stress level goes down. So all these emotions really, really provide impactful care for those who are marginalized and for those who need our help. Not just marginalized, who are going through loss and grief, right? You just, I'm just so sad for you, right? Instead of saying, I'm so sorry that you are going through that, but you can say, I am so sad for you, right? So all these empathic emotions are very, very powerful, and it actually is proved to be very effective for the other person's distress and recovery from that trauma. Another thing that you can utilize, I think I have some time here. So another thing that you can utilize is perspective taking. And there are different types of perspective taking that you can utilize. When you are, I am empathizing with this person, what people would say is in the other person's shoes, right? So self-oriented perspective taking is basically, I am taking your perspective, right? Your perspective, but from my own understanding. For example, this person got deported, right? And then you are talking with the rest of the family, and you are just trying to imagine how it would feel like, right? How it would feel as a wife for the husband to be deported and what's going to happen next, right? Then you are thinking, imagining from your self-oriented perspective and thinking, how would I feel if I get apart from my husband by force? Like if I'm forced to be this way, I am, right? Then, I'll be distressed, I'll be this, that. Other oriented perspective taking is that you think, you gather all the information you have about that person and think, if I had gone through what she had gone through, how would I feel? So you see that differences, right? Scholars believe that self-oriented and other-oriented perspective takings have its pros and cons. Self-oriented perspective taking is very natural, involuntary perspective taking, if you want. It's the most rudimentary type. Other-oriented perspective taking needs more cognitive effort, social and moral effort to understand by trying to utilize what you have, what you know about this person, gather the information, try to think and imagine hard to know more accurately about this person's situation and feelings. That's why the scholars are saying dual perspective taking is much better, meaning taking self-oriented and other-oriented perspective taking. Because yes. And then number 4, interdimensional perspective taking is what I termed, this is my term in my book, that It's basically what you see here, self-oriented, other-oriented. It's very, how would I put it, dyadic, like very one-to-one, very like two, it happens between two people, as if there is no other person other than two of us, as I try to understand what this person is going through. The problem is our brain doesn't work that way. It doesn't work only one-on-one situation. Our brain gathers information from all the resources I've had. For example, reading the news article. Oh, I read this story from a journal that this person went through this and in a similar situation, and this person said she felt this and that. So I utilize that information piece, right? So that's called supplementary perspectives that helps us to understand better about the other person that's right in front of me. So for example, my sweet sister-in-law, it's in my book as well. My sweet sister-in-law, it was during COVID time, was at grocery parking lot. And she was putting her groceries in the trunk, and all of a sudden she hears this shouting and yelling, and people just starts like collecting. So what is going on? And looked, and this Asian couple, he happens to be a Japanese American who was a veteran who served once for the United States, and the wife there, they were being mocked by these two white big guys. And people there were collecting and looking at them. They're passively just looking. Some people just here and there occasionally says, like, come on, stop it, right? But nobody just jumps in and helps them. So my sister-in-law jumped in. She's very brave. It's very admirable to see those brave people. So she jumped in, intervened right away, and fought for them against these white guys, against these racists. These racists were really threatening to attack them physically. Of course, verbal abuse was given. All these things were happening, and still they didn't stop. My sister-in-law had to fight them. So what went through, what happened in her mind? Let's think about it. Self-oriented perspective taking is that, oh, if I was mocked like they are, how would I feel? Like, how would you feel, right? Oh, I'll be perplexed. I'll be embarrassed. I'll be like, I don't know what to do, kind of situation that I'm frozen, right? And then the other oriented perspective taking kicks in, and you think, oh, it seems like they're not really fluent in speaking English. They can't really, it seems like they're murmuring, they're using like broken English. You gather all these information pieces. If I were them, who cannot properly express their feelings and thoughts, who cannot advocate themselves when absolutely in a situation where that's ridiculously racism, right? How would I feel if my language was not fluent in English? I cannot speak in my own original language, and everyone's watching, and no one does it. How would I feel? Then it gives her more perspective. Oh my gosh, if I cannot even express my feelings to other people, if I cannot even advocate for myself in this kind of situation, it will be horrible. I will be terrified, right? I will feel like, what is going on? I'm so shameful, right? So, and then the third one, in the interdisciplinary perspective taking kicks in. What my sister-in-law did was, oh, I kind of remember my sister-in-law, who's me, who mentioned about the anxiety that COVID-19 during the COVID-19 pandemic. She mentioned that she's very anxious because of the Asian hate crimes. And she shared her feelings and emotions. Now it becomes the supplementary perspective, third person's perspective, that becomes her perspective. And she understands better about these people. Then she is more motivated to intervene in that kind of situation. So this is very pro-social, but also as long as it's attuned and nuanced, we can provide proper care. So last one, as I wrap up, is this. How do we resist re-traumatization? So I had a little fun yesterday making this. This is last slide. So because we're in Mennonite community, so why not peace, right? So P, proactively seek to learn about trauma at an individual, communal, and social level, and how social marginality compound trauma exposures. E, ensure that the system and culture in the church community is based upon trauma-informed care. A, active empathic listening and response is essential. Make sure the voices and experiences of the marginalized and traumatized population are well recognized. The church should give the feeling that, oh, I can actually express myself. It's secure and safe here, right? So church should provide that safe place for them. C, create education program to train empathic capacity. And then lastly, very important, evoking the memory of traumatic event is not recommended. In the past, therapists thought that actually letting them talk about what happened to them would be very helpful. Guess what? It actually, in the process of thinking and memorizing, remembering all those what happened, actually re-traumatizes them again, even by just telling the story. So we gotta be really, really careful and cognizant. So even the retelling story of the trauma can be re-traumatize the person. So all these things together, I really wish that the community can utilize this information that I shared today. Thank you.
You've given us very useful information, and it's been research-based, coming out of your training and your experience, and we certainly thank you. We had a long church service. We started a little late. Let's take 2 questions.
If there are 2 questions.
If there are 2 questions.
I'm Art Smoker, and I went through a horrific trauma years ago, and I sought all kinds of help to get it done. And I've found that talking about that does not re-traumatize me because there was complete healing from it. And it might be helpful to others who go through trauma to hear my own experience.
Yes, thank you so much for that valuable comment, because the thing that I didn't mention is that trauma works very differently person to person. Every person reacts to trauma very differently. Every person's recovery process is very, very different. So some people like you may feel like, oh, this is very healing, right? I'm in a complete safe place. Someone is really actively listening to my experience and my feelings and thoughts. Someone is actually empathizing with me. It really feels healing, right? But people who had gone through traumatic event very intensely, especially when it, well, I would say every person reacts differently. So if there is possibility of re-traumatizing the person when you try to draw out the conversation about what happened to you, right? If there's any slight chance and you're not the professionally trained therapist, then you gotta be really careful when you do that. Yeah.
Last question. Since there is not a last question, I will make this comment. I am so
I
grateful, Dr.
worried.
Lee.
Were you gonna say something? Oh, no, no. Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm so grateful that the young men and women and middle-aged men and women at the seminary are getting the benefit of your training. They will be better pastors, missionaries, church workers for having been in your class. And thank you for this.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we didn't check the online community. I think it's so good.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.